Hey guys, we live in a world shaped by two things: oil and money. For nearly half a century, a hidden system has quietly propped up the power of a single nation, a secret pact buried deep in geopolitics that made the whole world pay for its energy in one currency. And in doing so, it made that currency king. This is the story of the trap. And maybe, just maybe, it's unraveling. Back in the early 1970s, the world was in turmoil. President Nixon had just slammed the gold window shut, ending the direct conversion of US dollars to gold. The old system was broken. At the same time, the 1973 oil shock sent prices skyrocketing. Everyone needed oil, which meant everyone needed dollars. A new mechanism was urgently needed. This is where a strategic deal was born. Oil exporting nations, starting with Saudi Arabia, agreed to price their oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, the US promised them military protection and economic partnership. This became known as the Petrodollar system. Oil sold in dollars, and those dollars recycled back into US Treasury bonds. This created a constant global demand for the dollar, allowing the United States to run huge deficits, borrow cheaply, and fund its global military presence. Basically, every time a country bought oil, they first had to buy dollars. This meant the US could print money and spend more freely, creating a financial loop backed by oil and secured by the US military. So how did this trap really work? Let's break it down. First, oil is priced in dollars. Since oil is the lifeblood of the global economy, this created constant demand for the US dollar. Second, those dollars get recycled. Oil-rich nations, swimming in cash, invested their profits back into US government debt. This financed America's spending and kept its interest rates artificially low. Third, this was all backed by military might. The US provided security in exchange for this sweet economic deal. Finally, this gave the US incredible global leverage. With so much of the world's trade and reserves in dollars, America could impose sanctions and control global finance. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of power. But traps, by their nature, are designed to catch something. By the early 2000s, the cracks started to show. The dollar's share of global reserves began to slip from its peak of over 70%. Countries like China, Russia, and India started looking for ways to trade for energy in their own currencies. Meanwhile, the US was piling on debt, its infrastructure was aging, and the costs of its global military commitments were soaring. On top of that, a huge shift was on the horizon. The move away from fossil fuels. If the dollar's power was tied to oil, what would happen in a world of renewable energy? These weren't signs of an overnight collapse, but they were serious warning flags. This is how the system that built American power also became its greatest trap. The US grew dependent on other countries buying its debt. To uphold its end of the bargain, it spent trillions on a global military presence, often getting entangled in conflicts far from home. While Wall Street benefited, the domestic economy often struggled, with manufacturing declining and inequality rising. The system fostered a kind of structural arrogance, an assumption that the world would always need and want US dollars. But the dollar's strength was never guaranteed. It was conditional, and when those conditions change, the advantage can flip into a liability. The US became addicted to cheap borrowing, funded by the very system that was now beginning to teeter. In recent years, the tide has clearly begun to turn. In 2018, China launched its own oil futures contract priced in its currency, the yuan, direct challenge to the dollar. The BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has expanded and is actively exploring trade outside the dollar system. And just recently, reports claimed that the 50-year petrodollar agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia quietly expired in June 2024. While experts say the system isn't dead yet, the signs are unmistakable. The world that created the petrodollar is changing. So, what happens if this trap finally springs? First, global demand for the dollar would drop. If countries don't need dollars for oil, there's less reason to hold them, which means less foreign money buying US debt. Second, US interest rates would have to rise significantly to attract buyers for its debt, making government borrowing massively expensive. Third, This could trigger serious inflation and weaken the dollar's purchasing power, making life more expensive for everyday Americans. With less money and less global buy-in, America's ability to project military power and influence would shrink. It would be a structural decline, leading to a new global order where new currencies and new powers rise. The trap isn't just financial. It's a direct threat to America's economic, political, and military foundations. Now, let's be clear. This isn't a prophecy of doom. It's an analysis. The end of the petrodollar system doesn't mean the immediate collapse of the United States, but it does mean the end of the system that underpins its global dominance. America might still be a major power, but it would have to live in a new reality, one with less automatic global financing and more domestic burdens. The real end of American power might not be a military defeat, but a quiet fading of its central role on the world stage. For Americans, that could mean higher borrowing costs and a world that no longer pays for your country as power simply by using its currency. For the rest of the world, it means a multipolar future with diverse currencies and new centers of influence. What happens next isn't determined by fate, but by choices. The U.S. could choose a path of reform and resilience, strengthening its domestic economy, investing in innovation, and building alliances based on partnership, not dominance. The transition to green energy threatens the old system, but it also offers a chance to lead in new technologies. Ultimately, preserving the dollar's role may depend more on trust and responsible governance than on military force. The U.S. could adapt, finding a new and relevant place in a changing world. Or it could try to cling to the past. The choice is between managed adaptation and a much harder fall. The end of the petrodollar isn't necessarily the end of America, but it is the end of an era where America could pay for its global role with other people's money. And that is the heart of the trap. Picture this. Treasury bonds are issued, but foreign buyers are hesitating. Oil tankers are accepting payments in yuan and rupees. The dollar is still around, but it's no longer the only game in town. In that moment, the United States faces a critical choice: reinvent or retreat. Will America lead the next era of clean energy and digital finance, or will it cling to an old structure, hoping the world will keep buying its debt, its power, and its currency? Because when the world stops buying, the trap springs shut. The petrodollar was never just about oil. It was about power. And power built on others paying your bills is a power that can vanish when the payments stop. The world is shifting. The only question is, are you paying attention? Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. See you next time.